The first question, which I just got from the bowl, is a very good one. How do you suggest working with difficulties when practicing metta, specifically in offering loving kindness to oneself? Kids, don't fight. Yeah.
Oh, I've got it. Working with difficulties when offering metta. Okay, I guess I'd have a question as to what kind of difficulties. Um, it doesn't say, right?
No. Well, in offering loving kindness to to oneself.
So is the difficulty that you feel you can't do that?
That's, yeah.
Okay, okay. That it's hard to appreciate ourselves. Okay, very familiar, very common. So there are many ways to practice metta. There is the way that's the sort of been taught. It's actually from the commentaries where we first offer it to ourselves and then to a neutral person and then, or ourself and then maybe a benefactor and then a neutral person and then a difficult person. But I think the question that's being asked is more about that just using that technique is fine. But I think what's being asked is sort of a deeper question, is a recognition that I don't really feel goodwill towards myself. And so I think that would call for during your practice, during your meditation, and actually as you're going about your daily life, to begin to notice the harsh and unkind self-talk without needing to fix it immediately or change it, but just getting more aware of how unkind you are to yourself. And slowly, I think as we start to recognize that and acknowledge it in a really deep way and start to question, well, would I act that way towards my loved ones? Would I act that way towards my best friend? And then beginning to investigate, well, if I wouldn't, which I'm sure you wouldn't, how then can I act towards myself as I would act towards my best friend? And so it's not about crushing those negative thoughts. It's more about sort of freeing them, just letting them arise and then not giving them any credence, recognizing, oh, wait a minute, that's really unkind. And then maybe practicing what would be a kinder thing to say to myself. What would be a kinder way to view what I seem to be viewing in a very negative way? And what would that, and then really feel that. Try it out for yourself and then really feel that. And then maybe particularly after you've maybe been doing that, in a particular sit maybe, then you might try the metta phrases and say, well, how does it feel when I say, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be cared for, whatever phrases you choose to use. That's off the top of my head.
Yeah. Thich Nhat Hanh has such a wonderful, sweet way sometimes of talking about issues like this. And the one that when I first heard this, I thought, oh, this is just childish. But then I started practicing it, and it was really wonderful. If if I'm unable to um, send metta to myself, that obviously enough bespeaks a certain, in some way, low regard for myself. And Thich Nhat Hanh has this thing that he says every now and then of holding ourself as we would a crying baby and just soothing, just soothing. That's what those of you who are lucky enough to be parents or who are parents, depending on the age of the kids. The um, when a baby cries, the first thing you do is not what's wrong here or ignore it. It's you pick up your baby and you just soothe it. And that might be one way to break through this not feeling goodwill for yourself. It's certainly soothing. I've used this any number of times for myself. So that might be one approach that we can do. That is acknowledge that if we can't give ourselves goodwill, then there's some pain, and it's probably not very far from the surface. So first soothe, and then if you're able to add some curiosity to that. What's really happening here? And it might be a deep, um, might be a lifelong investigation in terms of what you're finding. But just to be kind to yourself, and before you can do that, you first have to acknowledge that there's pain.
Okay.
I'll add one little thing. Just to follow up on David's comment here. One of the ways that I've thought about that is if you have a picture of yourself as a baby, and just because sometimes it's much easier to see that little baby or a little child, it doesn't have to be an infant, but, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old. Just think of that little 5-year-old and see if you can't offer kindness to that little 5-year-old.
Now okay, I thought we had some questions in chat. Those of you on Zoom, if you do have questions for us, feel free to add them in the chat section, and we'll be checking chat regularly. All of a sudden, there's a lot of technology to retreating in mindfulness. What I had said was, those of you on Zoom, if you have any questions, put it in chat and we'll check.
What are some practical methods to facilitate forgiveness, particularly of those most close to us, whom we can't avoid, and when triggers or reminders of the harm, hurt, seem ever present? I think forgiveness is central to virtually every spiritual path. It really, I think, it offers us the most profound way out of suffering. And so it's the most involved. We teach a forgiveness series in prison, forgiving others and asking forgiveness of others and so on. And it takes weeks. It's a long process. And one thing to understand about it from the get-go is what I learned from people when sitting with people who are dying, and who are unable to forgive some people for what they did. And then feeling mortified that they're a bad person, that they can't do it. So first is to just not do the second arrow thing, and just if you really don't have it in your heart to completely forgive someone, that's okay. So just let go of that should right away. And there are stages, there are levels of forgiveness. Um, this is a deep topic. There's an author named Robert Enright at UW-Madison who literally wrote the book on forgiveness, and it includes a workbook in these different stages of going through. The first one is simply to accept if you've been harmed, to just accept that. And the next is to begin to understand why this happened. And this is a very deep dive because the origins of the suffering are often lost in the mists of time through generations. I think it's one of the deepest spiritual explorations that we can do. But the last thing I want to say about this is that we don't forgive the person in order that they can be relieved of the wrong they've done to us. We forgive them so that we are no longer carrying them. That we are no longer carrying them. We are releasing them from our heart. We're not putting them out of our heart. We're not hating them. We're just simply releasing them so that this whole process of forgiveness is to our benefit so that we can move forward. They have their own karma. They have the results of their actions. We're not responsible for that. But we need to free ourselves from the harm that's been done to us. So this is a deep question and a big topic, and it's something that can be explored certainly in meditation, just to begin to understand what's transpired. And ultimately, we're all caught in this net of suffering. And ultimately, there is no one to blame. But early on in the process, there really is. So, again, I think I've said enough. Do either of you want to? Yeah, it's get some help. Get the help of a therapist or a spiritual advisor or a good friend, because when you can move through this path, it's big steps to awakening, really and truly. It's a doorway into awakening. So thank you for the question.
Stephen touched on this, but a couple things to remember, I think, with forgiveness is it's not like a light switch that you turn on and off. Forgiveness, as Stephen said, is a process. And that can be difficult when the person that you're feeling the need to forgive is close by, let alone a partner. Um, and that means moving forward that we stay on top of these things because so that things don't fester. The other thing to remember is, and this is putting what Stephen said in looking at from a slightly different angle, is that acts that need to be forgiven happened in the past. And in a way, if we carry those uh, incidents around in which we feel we've been wronged, it's like carrying a big backpack with a lot of heavy rocks in it. And as long as that backpack is on our back, we're carrying around the weight of the past. So part of this is just taking the backpack off, realizing that, as Lily Tomlin said, we can't create a better past, and moving on with the process of forgiveness, and also dealing with what that means to your current relationship with that person. So, another question? What physical and mental benefits have you noticed for yourselves from your many years of practice? I think, and if I were going to predict Steve's response, which would be very accurate, we can't um, get into comparing mine, but we can um, physical benefits. For me, the practice over the years has become feeling what I'm feeling in the body, not in the mind. So if that's a physical benefit, uh, that for me that would be a main one. Um, is the first place I go looking for what's happening is in my body because my mind is a tricky little guy and will come up with all kinds of excuses for not feeling what I'm feeling, but my body tells the truth more often than my mind. So I would leave it at that. Um, um, yeah, yeah, yeah. And mental, I would just say after all this practice, I'm probably more willing than I used to be to look deeply at myself and look in, at, physically and emotionally and mentally. Um, I don't know. I don't know. Everybody's going to be different. There's no point really. And I think saying what it is for me, because it'll be different for you. Everybody works with this practice quite differently. But I would say of maybe the most important for me is realizing that the body is the place to go because that's where the information is. Um,
Well, there are three things that happen in the mind as we get older. And one of them is we tend to lose our memory. And the other two I can't think of. I don't know because I don't know what it would have been like without the practice. Um, one of the reasons that the ancients gave for practicing Qigong was for longevity. And the reason they wanted longevity was because they felt their spiritual practice matured so much as they aged. And I can attest to that. That is really true. Um, all the as a friend of mine who said in one of the groups, this insight that I've experienced on this retreat made all those shitty meditations worth it. Just being able to keep on going with the faith that, or the confidence that sooner or later, we're in the process of waking up. So, we can't promise certain benefits. Um, I, I think my mind is much more clear than it used to be. I used to be a lot more confused. Um, that may have to do with the fact that I don't have to make money anymore, and my kids are left the house, and I don't know. But let's just say it's worth it.
I think I'd waffle less. I have a pretty good idea that I would be much worse off had I not had this practice. Um, I feel very confident saying the practice has made me happier. It's made me easier to live with so that more people are willing to live with me and to talk with me and be friends with me and be around me. Um, and I'm more willing to live with me and be around me. Um, I guess I have no questions that that's all due to the practice. Um, and in terms of seeing how things really are, seeing the truth, seeing what's worth getting upset about and what's not worth getting upset about, which is almost everything. And seeing what is worth spending my time on and developing in myself and what's kind of extra. And I think the other thing that's changed, I guess this is mental, is faith, increased confidence, faith, trust that these teachings are telling me the truth. And that even when it's hard to follow them or they don't make sense at the moment or I feel incapable or inadequate, that this is the path for me. So
We could